I would like to welcome all of you today to Jane's Walk for 2022. This is the first one that we've done in a couple of years for the reasons... A little louder, please. Okay. This is the Jane's Walk, the first one we've done in a couple of years for the reasons that I think everybody knows. So I'm delighted to see you and that it's not raining. It'd be nice if it was a little less windy, but we're going to do the best. So my name is Brandon Wilson. For those of you that don't know me, and I recognize a lot of faces here, so it's great to see you all. I actually head up the Historic Preservation Commission, which is a city commission in Somerville, obviously. And I'm here today doing the Jane's Walk after many years of doing these. And I hope you learn something. The purpose of this is called a citizen activist walk. This is not being led by a speaker, as I often do. I have somebody I hire, an architectural historian, but rather for people to come forward and give their observations and their thoughts and visions for this area that we've chosen, which is Brickbottom. And for Jane's Walk, often I choose areas that are actually vulnerable to change and is being transformed at the time, and I can see that it's going to continue changing, and it's always useful to get input and hear from the people that live in the area or who are interested in it. So I think many of you are here from Somerville, if not all. Can I ask if anybody is not here from Somerville? Not to put you on the spot, we welcome you, but... Oh, Cambridge. Oh, yeah. I know, it's hard to know when the border is, so... No, I ask because sometimes we get people from Boston, and we've even had people from across the country that have come, but not just for the walk necessarily, but are here. So, yeah, and this is this? Oh, yes. So this is a good place to start. This is Jose. He is normally the cook. Unfortunately, today he can't cook, and it's very disturbing because I'd already arranged for everybody to be able to come in there and enjoy some food in this diner, because I think a lot of people have passed by it or seen it or known about it, myself included, but never been inside. But it's wonderful food that they have. So, and he was actually giving a discount today. But unfortunately, the grill just broke this morning, and they haven't had time to fix it. So he does invite you to come back. Tomorrow they should have it fixed, and please do. And he'll probably give you the discount tomorrow if you say you're on the Jane's Walk as well. But it's really amazing. It's a one-person cook operation, and what he is able to do, and I understand from somebody that's going to talk to you a little bit about it, who comes regularly, is that this place is usually very crowded on the weekends. So this is an exception. So anyway, for those of you that don't know who Jane Jacobs is, I suspect there's a couple people here like that. And I just want to give you a couple of highlights of her life, because she's very influential in city planning and in architecture and community activism. And she is no longer alive, but she has left quite a legacy behind. She was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and then she moved to New York City in 1934. She was born in 1916. She lived in New York City for 3 decades and certainly left her mark when she was there. She always lived within 500 yards of Christopher Street, if anybody knows the West Village, that's downtown, and that's where she particularly had a lot of impact because she lived down there and she got involved as a resident. She's originally trained as a journalist, not as a city planner or a community organizer. She's particularly known for a book that you might have heard of called The Death and Life of Great American Cities, although she wrote a lot of other books as well. She had 3 children, and her husband was an architect, and she took her kids every place. She bicycled every place, and so they were very much involved in her activism. She fought against slum clearance, any place that she saw that it was happening, which was including the West Village. And many people know her because of Washington Square Park. They wanted to put a road through it, the planners that be at the time. And that's Washington Square Park is a lovely park. You can go there now and see how lovely it is because of her efforts. She organized people, and they were not able to put the road through in the highway. This is Robert Moses back in the 50s. She also got very involved in East Harlem. In 1968, she actually moved to Toronto. And that was because it was the time of the Vietnam War, and she didn't want her sons to get drafted. So they quickly, surreptitiously, in the dead of night, apparently moved to Toronto. that says something about her activism and her thoughtfulness. Some of the key principles, just to mention, and she has a very long life and a lot of influence, but just a couple things. Pragmatism. She really believed that ideas were fallible and that they need constant revision. And you do that based on your experiences in life and your observations, which is the whole reason we do these Jane's Walks, listening to all of you. She disliked top-down planning. Because she thought it should be bottom-up, listening to the residents that gave input and gave their ideas. Cities and their economies, she also very much believed, thrive because of their diversity as well as their density. So Somerville, I don't need to tell you, reflects that in spades. Also, commercial spaces. She always thought they worked best when the residents and the businesses worked alongside of each other, which I think is very telling for today. The commercial spaces are small and connected to existing paths, and that there's a density of buildings and of people and of short blocks is something that she very much believed in. So that also might be telling for today. She believed that cities were incubators for innovation as well as for new ideas, obviously coming out of that, and again, based on what she was hearing from the people around her, and in cities in particular, where you had such a diversity of people to give them. She has also thought that cities, planners needed to view cities more humanistically, and that not to impose a certain type of use just everywhere, and like they do in Euclidean zoning, which again is very much reflective of this area as well, as we walk around. And then just one quote that she had said, "Old ideas can sometimes use new buildings. New ideas must use old buildings." So that's just a little bit of a precursor to some of the things we'll be talking about today through many of the speakers that I've identified. Many of them are wearing name tags. Unfortunately, I ran out of name tags, blew away before I got here. So not all of them are, but they will self-identify when they're speaking, hopefully. There's a sign-in sheet going around, so if you didn't already sign, I would appreciate knowing. Great, Eileen has it over there with a pen. If you sign in, if you give me your email address, I will probably put on a mailing list that you won't get a lot of stuff from, but you might learn about some other things that we're promoting. The yellow calendars, I do encourage you, if you are interested in other events this month. This is May Preservation Month, and for those of you that have never been, we always organize a number of different types of events for different audiences, whether you're on a walking or biking or all kinds of things. So this year it's a little reduced because of the pandemic. So I also have information about the docent program that we've started in the city, which is an opportunity to go to the Prospect Hill Tower or the old Powder House or the Milk Row Cemetery and learn about those. And I have a calendar if you want. So enough about that. I'd now like to introduce the people that are going to start us off. Richard Rozakis is going to come up here as well. I have three people. George, if you could, McCready. Yes. George has very nicely put together something that's being passed around, and that was photos, because he grew up in the Brickbottom area. So, okay.
Sure.
You're going to hold this just because this helps him.
Okay. Well, I have to say the truth here now. The truth is that my grandparents lived there.
I think you want to project.
But
Can you hear over there, Barbara? Can you hear him?
My grandparents lived there could be louder. Let me turn up the. My grandparents lived there, and I spent many days and weeks there. I memorized the streets pretty much, and the interior of the houses of the people that lived there, because back then, no one had a phone either, and if you wanted to visit someone, you walked up and you knocked on their door, and they were always pleased to see you. It wasn't one of these, "Why didn't you let us know?" There was no way to let them know you were coming. It was a wonderful time, wonderful years. I was about 12 years old when they finally had raised the neighborhood, and it was a sad time because it was pretty much the second time those occupants of those houses were displaced. The first time they were displaced is when they first got here in the early 1900s, when they were being oppressed in their homeland. And they had to leave by force, and that's how they wound up here. and then having to be displaced a second time was kind of sad. But anyway, there were a lot of good times, many good times, and I don't know what else I can offer at this point. So.
Okay. So I would like to, Richard, do you want to come up as well? Okay. This is Richard Wazakis. Richard lives in the city now as well in another part, but he actually spent some of his childhood here. And I think he has some memory left.
Hi, everyone. I lived here through the 3rd grade. It was a wonderful place for most of us. It was a safe place. It was Little Greece, but it was Asia Minor Greeks. And they came for the work. There were 3 slaughter companies, Northeast Packaging, Swift and Company, and New England Dressed Wool. And Procter and Gamble used the fat to make soap. So that's what the community grew around, were the jobs that were there. And we had 3 coffee houses. You might call them tavernas. We had 2 stores, 3 stores, a bakery. And of course, when they threw us out, I went into shock. I had to leave home. I had to leave. We spoke Greek. When I went to school, we only spoke Greek. We had to learn English as we went to school. So for me and most of the people I know, we enjoyed living there. We weren't happy about what happened. You know, it's hard when you can't go back and see the place you were born, you know? And I remember the last actual building they tore down, because I would take a walk down there, was Somerville Smelting. And I have a map. It's not the best map. We had a good map in the artist colony that was on the wall that had the names of the property owners and the names of the business owners.
If you hold this, I'll actually show them what you're talking about.
Oh, you found it? Oh, my cousin's going to be very happy.
In the wind, this is going to be interesting, but...
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you found it.
And actually, this is at Brickbottom as well in a frame someplace. It seems to have disappeared, but this is my copy. But you can see very clearly what Richard's saying. This actually identifies all of the people by name and some information often about them that lived in this area. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And of course, the Dillboy family is there. That's the hero here in Somerville. The stadium, the field that you know about, and the bust in front of City Hall that's been there since 1936. So that's about all I can say now. I can show you things as we go along. The playground we used to play in, where we used to ride our sleds, and of course I mentioned calling my cousin George. He says, I want my father's liquor license back, so let them know. He had a tavern. He didn't own the property, but he had a tavern. And of course, after 1922, after the Christian annihilation of Asia Minor, including the Armenians that you might know about, they couldn't go back. A lot of them wanted to go back, but when they first came, they would go back and forth. But after 1922, there was nothing to go back for. So some did go back to mainland Greece or Chios, which is an island less than an hour across the bay from Alatsata, which was where George Dillboy came from, and 99% of the Greeks that lived in this community came from there. So that's all I got right now.
All right. Well, nobody's disappearing. You're going to be on the tour so people can ask questions separately. Yeah. But thank you for sharing this.
I'm glad you found that map. My cousins came from California, and I said, let's go down to the artist colony and you'll see where you used to live, and it was gone. But somehow you find it. God bless.
That's what historians and historic planners do. So, by the way, I've worked for the city for many years. I've been only working for the Preservation Commission for the last 22 years and so, but otherwise I do other types of planning as well. So, I'd now like to ask David Gus to come up because David is going to talk to us much more interested than I might based on a survey about this diner here, which is a pretty special diner. It's designated. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, if you didn't know, and you might have noticed there's a plaque there, which means it's designated locally as well as a local historic district. So, David?
Thank you.
He's one of the regulars here, I understand. So.
Well, I come here often. There was a diner up on 99 called Phyllis's Diner, and Phyllis had a card that said, "Where you're only a stranger once," and that's the kind of feeling one has in a diner like this. This is a wonderful place to start this Jane's Walk, because I identified Jane Jacobs with the fight against Robert Moses, who wanted to build a highway through Soho. And she was the first person to really stand up to Robert Moses and stop that. And the reason that Brickbottom was destroyed, it was designated a blight, was because they wanted to build a highway through here, which never got built either. So there's an interesting parallel between the two. And Buddy's is a real survivor. I estimate that there was about 9 diners at one time here. Dave, is that your count? That Somerville probably had about 9 diners at one time.
Probably something we don't even know about.
Exactly. But some people continue to believe that diners were made from used rail cars, which is, of course, not true. And what makes a diner is the fact that they were made in a factory that produced lunch cars or dining cars. And the one that was most famous in New England was the Worcester Lunch Car Company. There are many others. New Jersey led in terms of the different companies like the Raffaele, O'Mahony, and others. And there is an O'Mahony produced diner in Ball Square, which is Kelly's, which was brought up from New Jersey. Well, it was brought from Delaware, where it was housed for a long time. And one of the things about diners is that they were meant to be very mobile. And the early ones had wheels under them, and they could relocate, and often did. And this is a relocated diner. It was built in 1929 in Worcester and by the Worcester Car Lunch Company, one of their smallest models. I think it's 20 stools in all on both sides. And it was discovered in Leominster, where it lived its first years, and brought here in 1951. And it was called Cousins at that time. And the person who owned Cousins then opened another diner, which was larger, also a Worcester Car, in Union Square. And that Union Square diner was called Cousins, Blair's Diner, and Union Square Diner. Beautiful diner, demolished. It was near, well, it was halfway down from Dumula's and Union Square on the right side. The space is actually still open. Nothing's ever been put there. Buddy's, when it was sold, it also sold its name, which, as I mentioned, was Cousins at the time, and it was renamed by the Barrett family when they bought it as Buddy's Truck Stop. And people probably still remember Buddy's Truck Stop here, and that changed hands. The Barretts had it from from the 60s to about 2006, when Nikki Barrows purchased it, and she changed the name to just Buddy's, from Buddy's Truck Stop. And
Picture of Buddy's Truck Stop.
Buddy's Truck is right there, and she changed very little, and it's a very intact diner in terms of thinking the way it was created in the factory. When these were delivered, these diners had everything in them. They had the forks, the knives, spoons, the washing machine. Everything was in the diner that you would need. Most of these diners, and probably this one may have had a stained glass window on it. And it did. Yeah, so it did have a stained glass window on it. And this diner didn't have the panels that it has now. They were wooden panels, and that was one of the changes that the new owners made. By the dumpster are the original panels, and the and and in the front are the stainless steel with the wave patterns. Other than that, what else is there to say about Buddy's?
The Rosebud Diner in Davis Bridge.
Well, that's kind of being neutered in a certain way. So Rosebud was a 1941 Worcester car diner. And again, in New England, Worcester Car Company was a major manufacturer. But in the other areas of the country, particularly the middle states, it was not. And if you read Dick Gutman's book on diners and his book on the Worcester Car Company, he faults it for sort of not keeping up with styles, and it really remained in the same form as when it opened in 1906 in Worcester. And the factory where the diner was built is still there and is a used clothing store, a very good one too. And right across from it is Miss Worcester Diner. It's now they changed since I was last there. Yeah. Yeah. Did you get a tattoo? Yeah, okay. So I lost my train of thought there. I don't know if there was a train of thought, but that's the story of the Worcester Car diners in New England, which again, mentioning Dick Gutman, who's the leading dinerologist in the world, claims that it just never modernized. It didn't keep up with styles that were being demanded, particularly in post-war America. It kept manufacturing the same style over and over again, and it finally went out of business. The last diner that they made was 1957, and by 1961 they'd auctioned everything off, and the Worcester Car Diner was history. This is a wonderful and very unique example of an early 1929 Worcester Car Diner. I recommend it highly, and it is a kind of place where you're only a stranger once, and you learn a lot in this diner. It's a very social place where you don't just come for the food, you come for the conversation as well. And okay, there you go.
So with that introduction, I hope you will all come back. And do you want to say a couple of this? The cook is here himself because he can't cook right now. He has a cup of coffee.
Oh, there's coffee is available.
No, there is coffee available inside if you would like it before you take off and such. But I feel so badly because Jose does such a wonderful job with so many different food being prepared in very small space, as you can see. And so you do need to come back really to appreciate this. So I hope you will. A little bit more history. Thank you so much, David. David is a retired professor from Tufts, in case you didn't wonder why he's so articulate and so knowledgeable about diners as well. He's done a lot of terrific exhibits in the city for us. So thank you, David. Okay, so I want to move ahead to next door. This is a very historic area, so I'm just sort of setting the tone here. This is the Samuel Ireland House, and it was one of the older houses in the city. It was built in 1789 to 1792. So I want to ask a current resident to come forth now, Eileen Schofield, who just so happens to live next door to it. Come up here and just say, so we're moving ahead from history into current things.
Hello, thank you very much. As Brandon said, I'm Eileen Schofield, and I am a resident behind. You can actually see the peak of my house just up there. And I was very concerned about this house when we moved in. My husband owned this house. His family have owned this house since 1980. So the house in front of us was a big concern, and we noticed that no one's living in it. But, it is a beautiful house, and it needs to be restored to its excellent condition. Used to have a fantastic pristine garden with roses and apple trees and pear trees, and the fruit is still there, but unfortunately right now it's not feeding humans. We won't get into what it is feeding, but it is a beautiful house, and as you can see, they're trying. They just have not lived here for quite a while. So I'm a resident, and I love all of these places in this area and would love to see it improved. So thank you very much.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so does anybody else have any observations or impressions that they want to share while we're at this part? Yes, please.
How did the neighborhood work? In other words, where was the church? And where was the school, and how did people get to work? I assume they walked to Medford Street, or did they go this way?
Mostly they walked, and there were buses.
Yeah.
The church, if you know where the Demosthenes Club is on
Yeah.
Somerville,
Yes.
the first church they built was across the street
Oh,
and
okay.
became a veterans hall.
Yeah.
And it just recently got torn down, just recently. And before that, the church was rented over the Woolworths in Union Square.
Oh, wow.
And before that, they used to just have services at different homes.
Yeah.
That's the history of the church. Now it's on 29 Central Street,
Yeah.
which is the old Elks Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah, the question has been asked about where the church was, and Bill is asking that question, I think, because actually it's often a central focus of a neighborhood, and parishes in Boston particularly, and here as well, for the different communities. And so he's
Right.
just sharing about the Greek Orthodox church that was here, is no longer obviously here.
And-
There is another church down here, but that has no
No,
relevance
there's only
to...
one Greek Orthodox church in Somerville.
Right, exactly.
But that church was originally a mansion next to the Elks Hall, which was the Thayer Estate, who was
right.
the director of the hospital that was here, the McLean,
The McLean's
which is now
Hospital.
out in Belmont. And his little girl had the poem "Mary Had a Little Lamb" written for her on that location. And when I was very young, our priest lived in the old mansion, which they tore down and put up a community center.
Exactly. Okay, so we're going to move on, and we're going to go a little further down and to Joy Street area. But I was actually hoping that somebody was coming from. Karen will actually talk about it. We're going to go to look at where the T station is going to go, the Washington T station. And Karen Malloy has been very involved with Friends of the Community Path and a number of different groups in the city. So she's going to talk to us a little bit about that area. There was somebody coming from the city. Brad Rawson was going to try and make it, but he doesn't appear to be here right now. So Karen, can you... do you want to come here because we can actually see it better and maybe it's quieter than going over there?
So probably, I don't have a whole lot to say, but hi, Karen Malloy. You know, the T stop is going to open, you know, the rest of the Green Line extension will open in sometime this summer, which as we know could be September, but we don't really know yet. And alongside it will be the community path. The extension of the path that starts in Davis Square and attaches there to the linear path and then onto the Minuteman. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up is that there's another path that's being proposed right now. It's called the Mystic to Charles. That's just sort of a placeholder name, and it would connect from. This might be better to speak about when you do your assembly walk, but it would connect the Assembly T stop to Sullivan Square, go back around the Innerbelt, behind the Innerbelt area, and then meet up with the East Somerville T stop. So the thinking there is, connecting the Mystic River to the Charles River by foot, by bike, etc.
Okay, so we're going to walk. This is a little interesting area to get around. So I think the best way to do is to cross up here where there's a crosswalk right down here to get to the other side of the street, and I think we can wrap around to get onto Joy Street from there. We're having a lot of engaging conversation, and that's exactly what I wanted, so thank you. So it's a little odd, but we're going to stop here because I think we can actually at least see the T station sort of rising up here. And it's not very exciting.
I like that.
I hope they keep that.
It said down there that we weren't supposed to congregate, so I left there. I don't want to get in trouble. So, but anyway, so this is where the T-stop is going to be, and this is going to transform this area radically. I think that everybody can understand that. That's what transit is supposed to do. And so we're, on the one hand, very excited about the opportunities it presented, but on the other hand, it does present some challenges. And I know a number of you that are here are either from Brickbottom or from Joy Street Studios, and have some concerns and would like to stay in this area and worry whether or not you're going to be able to. So I think it's a good opportunity for us to kind of look and see what's here and understand a little bit better about what is being proposed and what needs to be reconsidered potentially. I didn't say over there, but I want to be remiss if I don't. If you were looking at the two historic properties, the diner as well as the house next door, the Samuel Ireland house, you might have noticed on one side there's a big, on the corner there's a lot that is about ready to be developed, and I don't actually know what's to be built there. Do you, Eileen? No?
Yeah. It's going to be a 3-story, 5-unit condo building.
Okay.
And they'll have a small business downstairs, but we fought them against putting in a convenience store. So I think it'll be like a bagel store or a small cafe. And they'll have a rooftop garden. So it's sort of going to be the same sort of design as the new buildings that are just to the right of it as well.
Is it the same developer as well then?
No, different developer.
So what
it's actually the one, the Flatiron building, like on Webster up there, that building there, it's the same developer.
That's it, okay. So what is happening in many parts of the city, as you probably know, is there's a lot more residential development going in. We're trying to accommodate the need for more housing for all the people that are here. And the second part of that is that the zoning requires that most cases that you put, if it's not in a residential neighborhood, is you have commercial space downstairs. And that's also for a number of different reasons. From a revenue point of view, it makes good sense because you get more taxes from commercial. But it's part of like Jane Jacobs' principle, which is what I was saying at the beginning, is that commercial spaces and residential work very nicely together, keeping an area vibrant and alive and serving the neighbors. And you have your hand up, so I'd love to hear you.
Well, I'm just kind of curious where the third leg of the green space, the amount of green space that was envisioned in Somerville fits into all this plan. And I feel like, what's really been short-sighted in almost all the planning is that green space isn't anchored and said this is where the green space is going to be. A little bit like what's happened up at if you look at North Cambridge and that whole area, where they basically said this is green space and we're developing around it, so you still have light and air and vista. It's up to the developers to, the last plan I saw for U-Haul had a tiny strip of green space completely inaccessible to anybody who is walking by. That there seems to be just this hopefulness that the developers are going to actually have a usable green space. And I'm not hearing that when you're talking about the development plans.
Well, I actually haven't talked about the development plans yet, but that's a very good point, and I think that we will be hearing about that. That's the next thing we're going to talk about. I agree that we can't expect developers in order to just out of their altruism to do that. It is certainly in the zoning provisions, and it is in Somerville, as you mentioned, which is the plan that was recently updated in order to make it even more current, and I think it certainly very much includes green space in there, and it should not be an afterthought. It should very much be integral to the development. So you're absolutely right. And what I was going to say about the two historic properties there, both of which are designated on the National Register as well as on locally, which is what's saving them from demolition, frankly. And that's really important. And I do want to make that point in this whole trip to this whole walk today, is that preservation of the older structures and preservation of a lot of what many of us feel brings character and interest to the city is something we need to be vigilant about. It's not just going to happen on its own. It needs people like yourselves to advocate for it and to come out to meetings and make sure that we save those structures that we think are significant. And one way to do that is by local historic designation, because that means that they cannot just go and demolish a building. Right now we have a demolition review ordinance that now has been fortunately amended so that we have up to 18 months before a developer or a property owner can come and demolish a property if it's deemed to be preferably preserved. But 18 months, at the end of that, it can be demolished. So those two properties, the Samuel Ireland House, 1790s, as well as the diner that we heard so eloquently talked about by David, could be gone, but they won't be because they've been designated. So there's another one that's actually coming onto the City Council agenda, I believe, this week, which is the 125 Highland Avenue Church that's owned by the Masons. And there has been a proposal by the developer, or it's under purchase and sale, to demolish it and put up luxury condos with some affordable units as required. And in order to forestall that, there has been a movement and led by the council for the area, the ward councillor Ben Uenkampen, to designate that as a local historic district. And so that could not be demolished. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But it is indicative of what we're seeing here. And one of the reasons we do Jane's Walks in vulnerable areas is so people become aware of those vulnerabilities and the need for protection, and people like yourself coming out. So thank you, Polly. I totally agree that that's necessary. So I have here today somebody that's going to talk a little bit about some of the plans that are proposed for this area. This is Logan Capone, and she works for Principal, which is the firm that the city is working alongside, and she'll tell you a little bit more.
Hi, so I'm Logan Capone. I work with Principal Group, and I used to work for the city of Somerville as well, so I know the community. But I'm not going to talk for long because it's really, Jane's Walk is not about us, it's about you, all the residents. So I'm helping to work on the Brickbottom Vision Small Area Plan. So as all of you, I'm sure know, this was identified as a 2040 Summer Vision Plan as a transformational area. And there's been a lot of development interest in the neighborhood. So one of the things that we're working on the plan that we've really heard from the community is to preserve the arts district neighborhood that's here, and as development interests come in, to make it more of a friendly neighborhood that's not only just celebrates the art district, but it feels more like a neighborhood. So a lot of the things we're working on are new street sections, so that hopefully the streets become more friendly to pedestrians and bikers, integrating green space and helping make connections to other parts of Inner Belt and across the McGrath Highway. So yeah, I'm happy to be here today and to hear from you all. It's been unfortunate, I think, over the past year and a half of COVID, we haven't really been able to have the, design charrette or community process that we would have liked to have here. I think I've seen a lot of you online and on the Miro and, virtual sessions that we've been having. And, but, I hope that the plan results in something that we can all be proud of and helps to drive, as development interests come in, to protect the existing uses and artist community that is here. So.
Hey, Logan actually worked with me for a while, so I feel great that she's working on this plan. It has very much a preservationist heart here. And Principal has actually done a number of other projects in the city, for the city, and they do understand a lot of Jane Jacobs' principles, I think. So I'm confident that they're really going to try and have them embraced here. Again, I do urge you as residents and people that work in this area to get involved if you're not already, or to stay involved and make sure that you let your voices be known, because that's how a lot of these plans develop. And just as I was saying before about Jane Jacobs, is that these plans are not just, there's only one right, there is not just one right way to do things. And the planners sometimes get a vision and then they try and impose it, as people say. And somebody asked the question before about, what's happening, why this is all happening here, being a Jane Jacobs talk, and why we're doing this. And that's because the highway that was supposed to come through here was very much like Jane Jacobs was fighting in New York City. She wasn't involved here because she was actually very involved in the 1950s, and the highway that was planned here to come through of Somerville, and part of it was in the 1960s. But it was, again, planners and activists that got involved that prevented that from happening. But it did take out the Brickbottom neighborhood, and that's really unfortunate, and that's why we need to be vigilant in making sure that these kinds of plans are really challenged and changed. And do you want to say some thoughts here?
Yeah, I got two other issues here as we're walking along.
Do you want to give your name and who you are?
Yeah, Bill Valletta, I'm at Brickbottom. This area where we're standing right here, down to 86 Joy Street, is probably the major concentration of Spanish-owned and Brazilian-owned businesses in Somerville. And if you go, jump over 86 and you get to the bus station there, that's probably the largest concentration of immigrant black workers in the city. The city's made lots of pronouncements about displacement and loss of jobs and loss of diversity, etc. And so far, the planning for this area has not asked or inquired into this, set of questions of what happens with the workers here and, what's their fate under the new transformational plan. Now, I have no answers at this point, but, it seems to me that we've got a responsibility to put that on the table as well.
You've actually worked with planners at one point in time, right? Correct?
Yeah, well, I am a planner, yeah.
He's not giving you the full story.
No, there's alternative ideas about this area of the city that maybe we shouldn't be, thinking of higher story buildings with commercial and retail and that kind of stuff in it, because that's not going to work. And maybe what we should be doing is basically preserving this as the ground floor. The storage and the trucking and the school buses, etc., and then build your laboratories and your apartment houses over that. So it remains an industrial zone at the street level, keeps a lot of these, blue-collar jobs, etc., and, recognizes the fact that the area is never going to be big enough in terms of the actual population here to actually support the kind of, active retail and kind of place-making stuff that the planners talk about. So that's my criticism where the planning has been, and you've all heard from me before.
Oh, thank you. No, it's good to hear. I mean, I think we like to be challenged. I mean, I am a planner, and I'm part of the field of study that actually, does come into areas and tries to fix things, as they used to say about us. And some people say, just leave it alone, will you? And that's what a lot of what Jane Jacobs did. But I think that there's some healthy dialogue that has been occurring, and we need to and to keep that going. So speaking of which, I want to try and keep to the time limit, and I want to move on to the Joy Street Studios. Oh, yes.
A specific question about the history. I don't know much about the dates and everything that you're saying, since it was raised for a highway that was supposed to come through, and so everything was raised in the 60s.
Well, not everything was raised, but a lot of it. 93 coming through really did a number on. So the Brickbottom neighborhood was, yes, it was considered slum clearance. And
We were talking about flooding was here until
It was right there, yeah, and it got knocked down.
And then when
they
did
put up
McGrath go up? Is that what came instead of the highway you're talking about?
Now,
No.
McGrath was like 1930.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. No, the graph
Because
was
that also raised neighborhoods on both
Right,
sides.
it did.
It did. It split off this area from Union Square, because actually Union Square used to come further down before. Yeah.
This was an industrial area. There were homes, as we know, but this was the heart of the city. It's called Brickbottom. The first industry in the city was making bricks. And there were brickyards here, which is why Charles Tuff's house is right across the street. He was a major brick maker. And after that, it was the stockyards. And we were the second or third largest stockyards in the country at the time. And they were here as was this filled with railroad tracks. Big hub with railroad tracks. So this was a very commercial area. And most of those industries, which were the leading industries in the city, disappeared, as did the people who lived in the cottages around them.
For those of you that were here in the beginning, George, I think George has left. Yeah, but that's when he was talking about a lot of the slaughterhouses, and I think you were as well, Richard. That's what was here before, and that's where people worked. So there were people around here, but they didn't live, some of them lived in this neighborhood, but then they also came from other parts of the city. It was a great source of labor and employment, basically. But this is hard. And this was always an industrial area. This is one of the areas, when I first came on with the city, one of the big controversies was Brickbottom as a live workspace that we created. And it was very exciting to think that there was going to be all artists living in the building. They ran into some problems when they went to get the financing and to do the renovation of the building. So they ended up having to make a third of the units and make it a hybrid building, so that a third of the units were market rate and the other 2/3 were for live workspace for artists. And then over time, a number of those artists, because of the way the deeds were written, they were not restrictive enough.
I would say Somerville really didn't give that much support. It was very difficult to have the notion of a live-work space. We got a lot of pushback, but right from the beginning, we knew to develop the building, to afford to develop spaces, that we were going to have to sell, and we sold almost half the spaces for market rate units. I mean, it was just the way financially the artists could actually afford to do this. And it wasn't like that we ran into problems then. Where we ran into problems were that when our certificates of occupancies got held up for about 6 weeks, which put us right at the edge of the real estate crash in 86 and 7, we had to resell almost all the market rate units. And we managed to be one of the few buildings of our size that were under development at that point that did not go bankrupt. We managed to sell a unit to pay every one of our bills right when it was almost like the wolf was at our doors. But we put a lot of the artists, the 100 artists that developed the building, we put sweat equity in. It was a very careful and considered plan. And I just want to say, and it was also done with very little support from the city. We got a lot of support from the Fort Point Channel organization, and we had a very, very good developer that actually shepherded us through the process.
Okay, so I was actually here then, so a little bit of a difference of opinion, but I certainly stand corrected on the third versus a half. I just remember the financing part was very difficult. The city's struggle with this, I have to say, was this was an industrial zone, and as you can see around us what that often meant. And so the idea that people would be living here as well, because it would be live workspace, was controversial. So that was the part that I think, as I was saying before about Jane Jacobs and saying that zoning is something, Euclidean zoning, which keeps land uses separated out. So you would have residents in one area, you'd have industry in another, and then the institutional commercial development in other areas, is what we are actually changing a lot right now. And there's much more mix of uses that's being promoted in places, and understanding that that actually is something that works very well in cities and such, and that adds to the diversity and to the innovation. And with all due respect for the work that you folks did, I think at that time it was early in that thinking, and that wasn't what people would necessarily wanted. And one of the struggles, or the challenges, if I might say, with that, and I struggled with this at the time, which was if the people that were living here were being viewed as artists that needed the special space where they could perform their art, or they could, they were industrial type artists, and so they wanted the tall windows and the large volumes and spaces, and they had machinery that they wanted to use and such. And so that was something that was specialized kind of living space. And so that building, that the Brickbottom, was perfect for that. What happened over time is that the people that were actually artists also were individuals, and they had families, and then they needed to see some things here that was more residential. So there was this conflict that sometimes develops when more industrial uses wanted to come into this area or continue to be in this area, and they were therefore not welcomed by some of the residents. So it's not an easy solution here. I think it can work, and I think the Brickbottom community has done a wonderful job at becoming an integral part of the city, and really challenging us on this such, and we appreciate that.
Car wants to get in this gate.
Oh. To see you all having conversations over there, so that's great. Okay, so this is Joy Street Studios, and you can read well. It's a very long building, and it has a number of artists in it. So today I've asked Paula Gabarino to be here to talk a little bit about Joy Street Studios. She can tell you she's been here for a number of years, and she has come from a number of other studios in the city as well. So she knows what displacement means in eviction, and the mail's coming. Okay, so Paula, so why don't you come forth and hold this as you will? So.
Okay. Hi. Hi. Let's see. I first came here in the late 80s because as a furniture builder, I needed some glass work done, and artisan glass was in here. This was long before it was turned into an artist community. Artisan glass was just an example of the kind of industrial-based small companies that were all over the area. So they occupied the whole first floor, part of the whole first floor. The rest were some cabinet makers, some other woodworkers, some industrial storage, and sometime in the 90s, the example of Brickbottom kind of hit home, and the owners of this building decided to start a few artist spaces. So they started chopping it up. We also had Vernon Street example as another place that had artist studios.
If you're not familiar, Vernon Street is actually more in the central part of the city. It's also an old industrial building, and it actually has a working space for a company at the same time. Rogers Foam Company is there, but they also have studios on many stories and 2 buildings.
One of the older tenants, a cabinet maker, John Cummings, told me that when he first moved in, like 25 years ago, there was a whole huge furniture company occupying this building. So the woodworking tradition goes way back. I had so when I came here, I was interested in this industrial basis because I am a woodworker that makes noise, that makes dust, and sometimes that's not what artists want. So by the time I came, what had started out as a small number of artist studios really were successful, and they expanded, and they kept adding and adding till the whole entire top floor is artist space, and a good percentage of the lower floor is artist space, and they still held on to some of that big industrial sized spaces that I could occupy, so I was happy. And now we got a cabinet shop next to me, and there was also another woodworker beside me for a while. And I felt welcome. There were woodworkers in the basement, so we could all make noise, and I never hear any complaints. I have concern about moving into an artist-only space. I feel I am an artisan with artistic pretensions, but I identify as a woman in the trades, you know, a manual laborer, in fact, and want that kind of space to be able to continue to be to produce what I am able to produce. Thank you. Yeah.
She's being very modest. She has actually products in the Smithsonian, and she's
No. In the Smithsonian Craft Show, it is not in the museum. They say, do not use our name to promote yourself. Don't do this.
You did. I did.
Yeah. So anyway, I also have been moved out of nice industrial space twice in my career. Back in the early 90s, I had to leave my first shop in Charlestown, where they turned a nice industrial building over to beautiful office spaces. Then 20 years later, I was removed from a building, nice building just across the Somerville line in Medford, because Tufts bought it and they turned it into nice office spaces. I feel that this is going to happen here. The building was bought by developers 2 years ago. They have submitted plans to tear down and replace with yet another lab building. So the city has not responded to their concepts. They already own the entire lot from here to Brickbottom, and they are putting up a monster building there. So that should satisfy them for a while, but they spent $23 million buying this. So this is, the only old building besides Brickbottom left in this neighborhood. And there's something about just the patina of it, if I could say. I love it. It's not everybody's taste, but couldn't we just keep it? But anyway, it's under threat, and that's my story.
Could you clarify the status of the tenancy? In other words, your building's different from ours because we own the condo strip. These are all leased spaces.
Yes.
And no one lives here. People work here.
Not allowed to live here.
Yeah. And most of the spaces are considerably smaller than the spaces in our building because they're workshop spaces. So
you clarified it right there.
400, 500 square feet.
Yeah.
Am I giving you an accurate figure?
Yes.
What was interesting is when they tore down the old safe, there was this like really ugly, like brown cladding, and they took the cladding off and they revealed this pristine white, beautiful, like a brick industrial building that I had no idea, like it had been like hidden behind like Cinderella, and then kind of 2 weeks later it was gone.
Oh.
No, one more question. Are the leases running out? Is there 100%
So they're all
occupancy
staggered.
At this point, or
They're all staggered, but they have not. They're all on 1-year lease now. So, for example, my 3-year lease will be due in September, and I have no idea what they will offer. But the assumption is that they cannot get a move on the plan, their desires for another 2-3 years, maybe more.
Well, and Neon Williams is searching for new space because they were just notified that they can only sign 3 months at a time. And he's like, how am I going to move this with 3 months notice? So I know they're trying to find something else.
Well, also I feel that an artist with a incredible storage space of their paintings has a big headache to move, but it does not compete with 4 major size pieces of woodworking machinery plus a ton of wood. So I was put in a panic state, and I did have my garage converted so I can move in if I have to. But it's a very unhappy move because I would be going from nearly 900 square feet to less than 400 square feet. And everything will fit, but there's no circulation room. So it seems...
So to give you another perspective as well, I've asked Barbara Mangum to be here. She's also has a studio even longer than Paula. And Barbara also is very much involved in the preservation movement in the city of Somerville. She is the president of the board of trustees for the Somerville Museum, and she's an object conservator and very much involved in her own field and doing her work here. So let her share some thoughts.
Hi, so unfortunately I didn't get to hear all of what Paula said, so I don't know how much you've already heard.
I suppose you heard that this was the Happy Homes Bakery originally. Was it the Happy Homes Bakery when you were here? Yeah. Must have smelled good.
Compared to Wednesdays when they slaughtered across the way.
So it's interesting. Evelyn Battinelli, who's the executive director of the Somerville Museum, her father actually worked in one of those slaughterhouses, and she remembers the smell of crossing over. So if you ever come to the Somerville Museum, get a chance to talk to Evelyn Battinelli, you will have a trove of history about the place and what it smelled like. But I've been here since 2004 when I was just starting to, I had retired as or resigned as the chief conservator of the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum, and I was going into private practice. And so this was a wonderful place to find. It's a great building. One of the things that I love about it is the freight elevator, which, of course would have been used in the industry. And it's one of those things that artists need in order to create a community. You need lots of people with different skills, and you need a lot of equipment. You need, certainly, everyone knows North Light is best for, viewing paintings and also for creating them. And here we don't always have North Light. You may have South Light or East or West, but you'll take what you can get. And especially if there's nice large windows. You can always modify it with blinds and things like that. So that's fantastic. Then also it's good for air circulation because you do wind up at times dealing with things that are a bit smelly. Mostly people these days try to use some kind of a water-based mix for solvents. It's required by the EPA. But in any event, you do need to have places where you can sometimes just go outside and do a messy project. And those kinds of things, having all of that, like for instance, when Artisans Asylum was here, I was so excited because they had so many different possibilities over there for creating works of art. And they were very small. They didn't have a studio as the size that I have, so they were more like cubbies. But they did have facilities, like, for instance, a spray booth. And a spray booth, like the auto companies would know, because that's how you get your car painted, after you've had a collision or something like that and they've had to fix it. So that kind of equipment is what you actually need when you have an artist building. So this has been really a fantastic building. Of course, I'm sure you've heard that it's been sold. It was sold for $22 million. And so the 90 artists inside here were like, well, they're not going to get the mortgage on a $20 million from the artists, right? So they must have other plans for this building. So far, the owners, which are Andy Dulac and his brother, but they've been very good. They've been really nice and responsive to us. They put in a new kitchen, which was great. And they've said that they want to keep this area lively and they want to see it artistic or stylish. So the thing is, when you start talking about style, you could be talking about a lot of money. That is not exactly the same thing as like your artists that are usually in the garret, right? So, there's one thing about, designing. You could be a designer of stylish golf clubs and you will make a lot of money, but maybe you'll be living here. But the other artists that I think most of us are not going to be able to afford that kind of rent. So whether this building becomes an artist or remains an artist studio or not is still up for grabs. We're hopeful. I just signed a lease for another year. So until May of next year, fingers crossed. After that, I don't know. And it depends a lot. The brothers own all of this area and on the other side of the tracks. So, and they're, of course, not the only developer in the area, but they're a major developer. And one can see, in terms of location, this is a great location for industries like medical labs and things like that. You're so close to Boston and, MIT and all of that, and just coming right in here. So I understand the inclination. But I am working with a whole group of artists
Hey.
Sorry.
Yeah. Working on Saturdays. But we are working with Paula and I and a lot of other artists get together and from other studios in the city. And we've been getting together about once a month to try and come up with a real concerted way to keep artists in the city. And we've been talking with Greg Jenkins, who's head of the Somerville Arts Council. And one of the things I think we're all really concerned about is that right now there is a kind of an artist overlay or a cultural fabrication overlay on a lot of these districts with zoning. Unfortunately, it does come down to talking about zoning, which is one of the things I probably hate most to talk about, because it's very picayune. You have to be very detailed about it. But if, for instance, a building or a developer has to put aside 5% for the arts, we don't want to see, one studio in an area, like 100 square feet. Okay, you put 5 square feet aside for an artist, like that just would not work. Because again, an artist community is lots of artists together and the thinking that goes on and that kind of stuff. And it's interesting being at the Somerville Museum, which has the first look show of open studios there. One of the things that was really brought into my mind by one of the past presidents of Somerville Open Studios was how important it is for the artists to come together and view each other's work and be a community. Because working as an artist is generally a pretty solitary experience. And so, it's kind of the care and feeding of your artists, the care and feeding of those who are involved with the humanities and with writing and poetry and all of this kind of thing. These people, they're going to do their work no matter where they are. But there is a way that you can do care and feeding.
Some visioning that's going on right now, and I do encourage you, as some of you already are, to get involved in that, because there is a lot of things that can be discussed and is being proposed, and nothing is cast in stone right now. So I urge you, as Logan was saying before, the group that the city is hired to work alongside of you folks in doing this is very much going to want to involve you, and the only reason that you haven't been more actively involved in more meetings and charrettes and things like that is because of the pandemic. Bringing people together and doing everything virtually is really hard to get people engaged, frankly. So why don't you come on?
I meant to say it earlier before I wrapped up, but we're working on our first draft now that's going to become like a public release. We're going to do an open house the first week of June. So I hope to see you all there, and I'm sure the city will be advertising it, and I'm sure I'll see you all there.
And you will see us all there.
I know. I'm sure.
So yeah, this is not a call to arms, but a call out to people, or shout out to everybody to stay involved and such, because this area is in transition. It is called a transformational area for a reason, and so there's a lot of things that are going to be discussed and some challenge. And I think we heard earlier today about the Brickbottom, which we're going to go to right now, because that actually has evolved a lot over time, and that was controversial at the time as well. So they're still there, and the good news is they actually own their space. So the one big contrast between Joy Street Studios and them is that their condominiums at Brickbottom, and so they actually control their space. And Joy Street Studios, I think many of them would love to have that opportunity, but at the price that it might be, given what the price that the developers paid for this building, might be out of their reach. And even a very successful artisan like Paula cannot afford to buy that kind of condominium space for the amount of space that she needs to pursue her talents and such. Is going to be very expensive. So working together, the city is, I do want to make this very clear, is the city is very keen on keeping artists here in the city. It's not lost on us what they bring to the community. We have a very strong arts council, as I'm sure you all know. We do a lot of events here in the city. Greg Jenkins, who heads that, is actively involved in discussions with the planners ours in terms of this stuff. We have overlay districts that we've put in, and we're actually, the new zoning that was adopted a couple of years ago very much makes it clear that we're going to have artisans kept here. Artisans Asylum unfortunately left, but that was nothing on the city's part doing. We were very sad to see them leave. We're hoping that another group like that will come in because they really fit a need here in this community. So, and with Summer Nova, which is another part of the city, is working actively as well to keep artists in their area as well and artisans. So I don't want anybody to leave thinking that the city is against the artists by any stretch. It is something we really need to work in partnership here. But I do urge you to get involved and to speak out. And again, that's one of the reasons that we chose Brickbottom today to do this. It's a great neighborhood and it's going through change. So let's walk down to what it's named after, the Brickbottom Artists Community. This is the end of the walk, but it's the nicest part. So I'm glad that we were able to start where we were on the on Washington Street with all the noise and commotion and traffic and come to this very peaceful oasis here in Brickbottom. So this is the courtyard that's been created, and we have a couple people that are going to speak today. And so we're going to start off with Polly Pock, who is a resident here, as the others are as well. Yeah, Alexander's certainly going to speak as well, and Dan, somebody else is going to be here, but no, I guess not. Okay, so these two are going to tell you a little bit about their experience here and what they've observed and what they're hoping for the future as well.
Thank you. I love this. Okay, so it's as Brandon just said. Here's our little oasis, especially from coming in. Through what we've been living through with all this construction going on around us. We used to kind of have vistas on either side, and now we're in this pinch of the Green Line extension that comes 2 tracks right on either side of us, as well as the community path. To give you a little bit of history, this used to be an A&P factory. I'm not entirely sure when it was built, probably 20s, 30s, something like that, maybe 30s. 1900. Oh, 1900? Oh.
I have the survey.
Oh, really? Okay. I didn't think they made concrete buildings. Anyway, and this was, I'm not sure that this is actually true. Somebody told me it wasn't, but this is the cannery building where they did cannery. That's the foundry, which is a 1-story area. And this was the bakery, which is a 5-story building. You're just seeing the low roof here. And this actually is where they used to candle eggs. It was covered. And candling eggs is where you hold eggs up to the light to see if they're fertile or not. Yeah. And we have been, and then Allison has sort of already talked a little bit about how we came in the 80s. It wasn't me, but the other people who were valiant, and turned this around. And then we created a Brickbottom Artists Association in '89, I think, and based off the gallery, which was at the time was the biggest nonprofit gallery in Somerville, maybe still is. And we now have about 100 members in the Brickbottom Artists Association. So it extends not just here, artists here, but throughout Somerville and even beyond. And we're going to next go into the gallery so you can see what that looks like. Just to kind of talk a little bit about the vision, we, Bill Valletta and Kim Schmauman, an architect, and myself, worked with the planning department for several years on trying to think about what the vision for this whole district could be. And we were instrumental in getting the base layer to remain a fabrication commercial district. Because at the time, they were quite surprised that as residents here, we didn't want just to have residential. And the reality is, as people have been speaking before, is that artists need an industrial neighborhood. And we need to be able to have a dumpster out front, and we need to be able to have loading docks, and we need to be able to have a lot in and out traffic and trucks. And this whole neighborhood was mixed of 1- and 2-story residential and industry, but not high-rise residential or large residential or even large commercial. And one of the reasons that we can't really support that down at this area is that we're in a cul-de-sac. We have McGrath Highway on this side, and that can't be lowered here because it has to go up and over the Green Line extension, and then it gets lowered. And over here, we have also the Green Line extension as well as the commuter rail. And behind us is all of the Boston Engine Terminal and all the tracks that go in here. And so this can't change. So you can't really support a lot of density down in here. And so kind of some of the plans that had been talked about, at one point, for instance, the building right across from us, they wanted to put up a 7-story, 2-acre, not low income, but dense housing units. And it simply can't support. You can't have fire trucks, you don't have the water system, the sewage system, none of that can support that kind of density. So we've been working really closely with the city to try to think about ways to keep this industrial yet work as a nice neighborhood. And I'm really glad that a lot of the vision plans are moving in that direction. And one of our thoughts had been to create buildings that were high floor to ceiling height, so you keep the density down, a couple of floors, but they're fabrication buildings and they're adaptable. And so all these incubators, like Greentown Labs, that incubate, they send people then off to Malden because they can't afford to be in any city. And the people that support them, the small manufacturers, woodworkers, et cetera, also have to move somewhere else because they can't afford the rents. They're up in New Hampshire. And so we were thinking that this could be a district that is the next step from incubation, is that people can move here to do small level fabrication, which includes the arts, and support it that way. And that will keep the density down and keep supporting kind of what has made Somerville really great. And it's in keeping with what the neighborhood used to be. This is up to Poplar Street. Beyond Poplar Street, that's where the density can start to raise up, we thought, because that's getting closer to the T station, and the reality is that that just has to develop for the city. So that's kind of a vision that we've had, and a lot of people at Brickbottom have been involved in that and working on the brainstorming, et cetera.
I just want to mention, in talking to Allison a little further about things, because I was actually here when this was all being developed, and this was under the Mayor Jean Brun administration, and so she was just reminding me that Jean Brun was actually as the mayor, very supportive of this project as well. And again, I don't want to leave the impression that we were against what they were trying to do here. It was just really hard. But one of the conflicts that came up that I recall vividly was that the people that were buying the market rate units had very different expectations about what kind of living environment that they wanted to have. Since they paid fair market value for their properties and didn't have it subsidized and such, they felt rather strongly about that.
Well, we did have a lawsuit that happened, but it was more about the financing issues. What happened is that we were a condominium. I mean, we were a co-op, and the co-op actually owned half the building, more than half the building. And the other people were condos. And when the real estate crash hit at that time period, because Massachusetts had no real histories of financing co-ops, we had an industrial loan. And at the time, our industrial loan was going from 12% to 21%. And at that point, as a group, we had a session with the person who developed our building, who basically walked us through how close to bankruptcy we were. And that was when we ended up basically disbanding the co-op and switching to condominiums, was sheerly based on the fact that it was unsustainable with the 21% interest rate, and that we were locked into back to 11%, which was what was residential at the time, which still is a high interest rate. Anyway, so in terms of the banks, agreed to finance all the artists no matter what our income was. That the strength, and we had actually, the strength of our group was that we had some people that had money, and we had a lot of us had very little money, like scraping up our, payment to buy into the group, pretty much wiped us out financially. So the banks said that they would give us all mortgages, but they would not allow any deed restrictions to have it stay perpetual to artists based. And the people who had bought the market rate units felt that by us switching from a co-op to a condo, that we actually diluted the value of their spaces. And that was and that there, was a lawsuit. There were actually lawyers in the building that initiated, and it went up. It never actually made it past discovery, but it, was about a 3-year, 4-year ball of, just angst in our building. And why it actually sort of resolved is that most of us still have not sold our spaces. So we still have a high percentage, like 65% of people have not moved on or gone elsewhere. And, in terms of an artist living here, I think what other community ever basically restricts their largest financial asset? It's sort of like you don't see other groups saying, okay, I'm going to put all the sweat equity in, I'm going to put all this money in, and I'm going to also make it so that I'm not going to be able to make a profit at the end. My hope was that our space would always stay for an artist. We haven't really developed it that much. It's wide open. It's, it would be attractive to somebody in the arts community, but the bigger issue is how much financial support do any artists get from our government, from our, it's sort of, being involved in the artist. I support myself. I work a second job so I can actually stay an artist, because there is no national art support for an artist. That there are few, Massachusetts has few, every year has a cycle, but it's not like somebody could ever make a living by winning an award from from Massachusetts. So it's a very complicated issue. And I was also going to say is that what would make me leave Somerville is the environmental stress that's happening. Living 3 years of 24/7 construction on both sides of the building. Now waking up at 7 in the morning to jackhammering across the street. At some point, it's going to be, people are going to reach a level, and people here have reached a level where they have said enough. I can't deal with the noise anymore.
There's that huge thing that's being built just opposite here on the corner.
That one across the street?
Yeah.
That's not actually huge. They've agreed to keep the 6 stories.
4 stories.
4? Yeah. 4 stories with mechanicals. What's huge is across there, 15 McGrath, which is going to be 11 plus 2 stories mechanicals. And then the 2 Pat's Toe, they're proposing 2 towers with 23 stories. 1,000 cars parked underneath it. They're now down to 900, and those cars are going to be, half of them are going to dump through and circle our neighborhood. Those are the environmental stresses.
And when you said there were 300 residents, and that was a lot. 6 to 800. 6 to 800 residents versus several buildings, each with 1,000 apiece. I mean, we just can't support this.
First urban redevelopment project in the country, and it was a total failure. And it may happen again if they don't play their cards right. I mean, the West End happened right after this. They used this as an example. They called us a slum.
Yeah. Actually, when the last house burned down, we had it was in sometime in the 90s, 95, and had been a smelting company, but that actually was the last tenement home.
Yes.
Actually, if everyone wants to see, there's a giant photo when we go in the next hallway that we go down to the restroom, and you can see what the building looked like and the neighborhood looked like then.
And it's
Okay.
just
So
amazing what these
let's move on because we're getting to the end of this, and I want to make sure that everybody gets to see the gallery space, and Alexandra has a chance to speak to us. So thank you. So I'd like to introduce the last person that is going to speak today, which is Alexandra, who is a resident here as well as an art teacher, and she's going to talk a little bit about one of the things that she's developed here, which is pretty exciting to have right here in the building.
So my school is actually in Joy Street Studios.
Oh, okay.
There was yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so I was in the space in Allston. And then I lost the space and ended up in Joy Street Studios. And I've been there since 2015. I absolutely accidentally got the space in this building and became a director of this gallery last month. But my school is called Art School 99. It has a website, artschool99somerville.com. I don't know, I am depending on our Joy Street building situation very much on the parking lot, which is in front of it. So a lot of, for many people who want to take art class after a job, after work, it's really critical to be able to park. And there are not so many choices, actually. So that's what I can do. So people can find information about the school.
So I'm going to end here, and thank you all for coming today, and hopefully you learned a little bit more about Jane Jacobs as a person and the influence that she's had in the community building, I would call it, and what are some of the principles that she espoused that are still very valid today and very much in practice here in the Brickbottom area, and we're hoping to keep that. But again, I urge you all to stay involved and to participate, be vocal. Controversy is fun. The city welcomes that, and planners need to be challenged. We don't always have the right answers. As I said with Jane Jacobs, I agree. There's no fallacy. It's not something that there's a one right way to do things. And it really needs to be based on, the people that live in the area and are involved or want to be in the area and the visioning. And this visioning process is going on right now. And so we do want to encourage you to give us your ideas. And we do want to keep innovating. We do want the artists to be very much an integral part of the city as they have been, giving it so much of the character that it has. And that can't happen unless we all work together. Just one little analogy is when we were talking before about when Allison was saying, that the difficulties of being an artist and living in these spaces and being able to afford it and needing to have a community, as we talked about before. And it's like affordable housing is another issue like this as well. The question is affordable housing, should you do, like we have 20% required for across the board for developers. Should that all be in one building if you're only going to have 4 units? Is that appropriate community that you're creating there, or would it be better to have the affordable housing more clustered together in a different area of the city, off-site as they call that? So this is another controversy that's raging right now that is comparable, I think, in many ways, because you do need a certain density of artists or people of like minds living together in order to have that exchange of ideas and people feeling comfortable. Like you were saying in the Greek neighborhood, it was wonderful because you were growing up with people that you could speak your native language to. You can't do that if you only have a very small subset and they just get subsumed, really. So I think these are all thoughts that we should think about, as we think about planning and continuing to build on our community here in Somerville. And the part about Somerville that I love is that we can come together, that we're small enough in order to have these kinds of discussions and work out our differences and such. And so I encourage you to do that. So again, thank you. And also encourage you to go back to Buddy's tomorrow and give him some business.
Our goals are